First off, I just want to avoid confusion and say this isn't so much of a review, but an analysis pointing out some of the aspects of the Rebuild films I personally found to be flawed. There are definitely merits to these films, such as the animation quality and the music, but I am dumbfounded by the amount of praise these films have been receiving. If you find yourself as one of the fans, that's great. But I feel like they're not quite as good as some people make them out to be, and my job in these series of videos will be to highlight some of the questionable aspects and things that need to be answered. If you haven't seen the Rebuild of Evangelion films as well as the Neon Genesis Evangelion TV series, I highly urge you to do so because full spoilers will follow for both. Having seen 3 movies out of 4, I can safely say there's quite a bit in the way of characters and plot that doesn't make much sense within the context of the films. Many fans would justify this by saying that we'll have to wait until the 4th movie to really make any final opinions, but I'd like to point out that people were making opinions about the first and second Matrix movies from the word go, and some didn't like the second movie. That's usually how it is. Each movie can be taken at face value and serves as a mini arc to judge character, plot, cinematography, music, pacing, and in this case, animation, as with most trilogies, or tetralogies, I guess. While I would agree that reviewing something like a series before it's finished is far too premature, especially with the episodic format, it's not like we have to wait very long. However, these are movies. They need to stand on their own, much like how some episodes can be considered bad or good, some installments can be as well. Each one should be self-contained and should at least eventually make sense within the context of its own world. It also has to support the rest of the films. Fellowship of the Ring, for example, worked as a film from start to finish. It had a self-contained story that made sense within its own set of laws established. It was a world that worked on the second level of suspension of disbelief, known as secondary belief, a term invented actually by the author of the Lord of the Rings novels, J.R.R. Tolkien. The storymaker's success depends on his ability to make a consistent secondary world which your mind can enter. Inside it, what he relates is true, it accords with the laws of that world. You therefore believe it, while you are, as it were, inside. J.R.R. Tolkien. So far, the Rebuild films have kind of failed at holding on to the concept of secondary belief. It pulls a lot of nonsense out of itself for the sake of mostly just surprising viewers who have already seen Neon Genesis Evangelion, and a lot of things haven't worked within the context of the secondary belief. The latest movie in the Eva Rebuild was 3.0, and it hardly worked as a sequel to 2.0, let alone as a standalone story. It completely relies on the potential of the 4th movie. But I'd like to argue that we haven't even had any clarity since the second one, and for the 4th one to give us any answers, it's probably going to have to write itself expositionally backwards to clear everything up. After all, the goal of these movies was to streamline Evangelion, but they've hardly even bothered to develop anybody in the character department, so if that was going to be a fallback, then it fails in that sense compared to the series as well. And as for now, we don't have backstories for Mari, Asuka, Kaoru, or any of the cast of 3.0, much less the motivations of all the characters, including the nature of Misato's motivation, Kaji's motivation in general, Gendo's motivation, or Mari's. This is of course assuming that the Rebuild stands on its own and doesn't rely on the TV series of Neon Genesis Evangelion as a supplement to understand character traits and motives, excluding the new additions. But even if it did, it wouldn't work on the grounds of it being a sequel to End of Evangelion, which is currently a popular theory for the direction these films are taking. While it is true that a backstory isn't necessarily needed to develop characters, it only works if they have actions in the present to give them substance. Given the Rebuild's tendency to go backwards on development and go forwards without justification, we at least need some kind of background for them. The fact that a 14-year time skip happened in 3.0 only makes it more urgent now because it created the need for necessary backstories for characters that were already developed. In some cases, okay, I admit that there's a bit in the way of character background, though, at least a little bit for Asuka, and also for some of Yui, Shinji's mother, even though in Asuka's case, it's just only symbolism hinting at her past. The hand puppet, if we were to take it at face value, actually represents a more stable relationship with her mother, especially since she carries it around and doesn't condemn it. It's a more positive spin on the doll imagery, which was a negative symbol in the original, representing the hollowness of her self-esteem caused by the traumatization of her mother replacing her with a doll, literally. Even so, Asuka uses dolls in a negative context in the elevator scene.
His obedient little doll that does every single thing he says!
I am not a doll.
Yes, you are!
Which could mean I'm wrong, but this imagery in particular is the only thing that we get in the ways of Asuka. I'd like to also point out that anybody who hasn't seen Neon Genesis Evangelion wouldn't understand this aspect of her character anyway.
Nothing's changed. It's just like before.
If the rebuild was a standalone, we should have gotten some kind of context to go along with this doll. As for Shinji's mother, it was a brief moment of exposition that simply stated history already familiar to us in Neon Genesis if you were to pick up on it, confirming that at least some things in the series has indeed carried over. If these characters are truly different in terms of their development and background, and the canon is supposedly different now, we need to have further explanations as to how they're different and why, but we don't. If it is truly a sequel to End of Evangelion, then we need more hints as to how they've forgotten their past and why somehow they were able to rebuild the destruction caused by Third Impact and the nature of impacts in general. In the original series, we got an explanation for how Third Impact commences through visual cues in End of Evangelion, and at the very least, dialogue from Kaoru Gendo Sile and Kaji in Neon Genesis. It's implied that the fusion of Adam and Lilith will cause Third Impact and a wish for whomever controls Adam and Lilith. However, in 2.0, Third Impact occurs when Shinji goes into God mode and tries to save Rei. There is no build-up, no explanation, and no implication that this would have happened. It's not foreshadowed, it comes out of nowhere. Berserker mode for Unit 1 was established in Episode 2 of NGE and foreshadowed in the first episode. If they were going to have this God mode thing, it should have definitely been foreshadowed in 1.0 instead of only Berserker mode, which was actually pointlessly established and has yet to be used outside 1.0's first 20 minutes. It almost feels like a Deus Ex Machina now that it happened in the first place. Eva Unit 1 in the original was a unit, logically speaking, probably the only unit derived from Lilith, as confirmed in the End of Evangelion. So when it was in contact with the Eva series derived from Adam under certain ritualistic circumstances involving the Lance of Longinus as the control method under the conditions of the Angel's destructions according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, only then would human instrumentality commence. Of course, that was foiled since Gendo had fused the remains of Adam with Rei, who he was counting on as the control method of Third Impact, and then she betrayed him, granting Shinji's wish as a conscious decision on her part. All of this is very complicated for a reason, of course. It was written like this due to the fact that they couldn't just throw some kid into a unit and expect his testosterone levels to somehow make him merge with his Eva unit's consciousness, and then he somehow fuses with an angel that's in the middle of the franchise, causing a climax that is otherwise too early for the sake of being different. Then we wind up with something like 3.0. And remember, before 3.0 even came out, they had already stopped Third Impact from happening, so that was like, oh well, forget that. Also, as I stated before, the angels all needed to be killed, and this was integral to the way the plot played out if humans were going to be the ones to initiate impact, otherwise the angels would take over the world. We see that kind of thing in 3.0 a little bit, but why wouldn't all the humans have been wiped out? There's some kind of feeble angel creatures that, well, we aren't sure of what they exactly are, but they're angel-like. Is it because of the 2.5 impact, or did Sele make them, or did somehow Gendo make them? I'm not sure. The fact that Shinji was able to sync with his unit in 2.0 in such a way that he enters some sort of godlike power kind of thing makes no sense from a character standpoint and plot-wise. It was never established that a pilot could potentially control their unit's bestial powers at any point in time, much less that an Eva could shoot ancient Egyptian laser beams from their eyes. It's pretty bad if you consider that everything I have for basis in terms of lore, such as how Third Impact commences, is from NGE. Everything I know about the Angels and Evas is from NGE. You'd think that the writers, if they were going to try to make a more accessible version of Evangelion, they'd do a better job of trying to explain all this. If the rebuild had released as it was, without the series having ever existed, there would be so much confusion amongst viewers, and we shouldn't have to watch the series just to get it if that were the case. It's presenting itself as a remake. Sequel theorists be damned. But the frustrating thing is that all of this is kind of avoidable. For example, they could have even perhaps mentioned in passing that one of the goals for the pilots was to eventually reach this stage of being able to control units' hidden power. Think about the new Star Trek series. The first movie actually tied into the old universe pretty well, and was, in a way, a remake that was a sequel kind of like these movies. Sort of. It did a pretty good job of trying to explain everything. It didn't rely on you to have watched the series beforehand, but you would have still gotten something extra out of it. Plot-wise, it still made sense. It tried very hard to be its own identity, but at the same time tried to retain the old identity. Shinji follows the exact same character growth structure in 2.0 that he did in the series. The only difference now is that Rei is in peril. Shinji had all the same conversations. It was in different locations with sometimes different characters, but his character went through all the same stuff. If he was capable of entering something like God mode, he would have done it in episode 23 when Rei was being absorbed by Armisael. People claim 2.0 is really different, but is it really that different? Why would the writers choose to do something like this? Was it an artistic choice? Well, I think I know why. Because Anno, series creator, felt the need to change it from Berserker mode to something to surprise the audience and make them feel it was different. Assuming the translation is reliable, I have a quote from him that states, "From the second part onward, I intended to abandon those elements fixated on the original series and proceed with the feeling that I was making an entirely new work. I would set out from ground zero." Don't get me wrong, I don't feel like it should be the same. That would be boring. We have already seen NGE. I can just watch that. The problem is that they didn't deviate from the original early enough in 1.0 and 2.0. Adding Beast Mode, a pointless character, and God Mode, along with taking out key attributes, the secondary character's complexity only serves to make the story more shallow. You think in the next movie, things would have cleared up, but they don't. So now 4.0 has to write itself backwards to explain the events of 2.0. And would it have been so hard to foreshadow the events of 2.0 and 3.0 in the first place? Judging by the trailer for 3.0 and 2.0 and how different it is to the finished product, I doubt the writers have any idea where the story is going. All of these new attributes to Evangelion lore kind of feels like finding out you can go over Super Saiyan 4. Why? I don't know. Maybe Shinji's just the chosen one.
Next time on You Do Not Make Sense! Shinji and pals explore what it means to be a good character. A certain someone doesn't make the cut. Syncing with a unit is more complicated than you'd think. Is this seriously continuing off of End of Evangelion? There'll be a shit ton of fan service. Evangelion, You Do Not Make Sense Part 2, The Chosen One.